My aunt rejected me for being poor, but my secret inheritance made her beg for my help. Aunt Seraphina's living room, a space usually suffocating with the cloying scent of imported lilies and her own unshakable self-regard, felt different that day. The usual polite, almost suffocating, atmosphere had been replaced by a distinct, almost electric tension. It was palpable, thick enough to cut, and it hummed with an unspoken expectation. "Honestly, Lyra," she purred, her voice a sickly sweet concoction of mock sympathy, a sound I'd grown to recognize as the prelude to another one of her carefully orchestrated attacks. "It's truly a shame you couldn't manage to contribute anything to the family trust. Imagine, after all these years, still struggling to make ends meet with your textiles." Her eyes, sharp as shards of glass and incredibly calculating, raked over my simple, yet meticulously well-made, linen dress. It was a piece I had sewn myself, a quiet testament to my craft, yet in her world, it was an emblem of my supposed failure. A faint sneer, quick as a viper's tongue, played on her perfectly sculpted lips as she addressed the assembled family. She subtly shifted, positioning herself in the center of the room, a beacon of benevolent matriarchy, or so she desperately wanted to appear. It truly breaks my heart to see such potential wasted on such a modest existence. She paused, a master manipulator, letting the silence amplify her words, allowing the weight of her insinuation to settle over the room. She was enjoying her perceived triumph, savoring it like a fine, rare wine. My cousin, Chloe, usually so boisterous, fidgeted uncomfortably in her opulent armchair, her gaze fixed on the intricate Persian rug, doing everything in her power to avoid my eyes. She knew, deep down, that her mother's words were cruel, but her loyalty, or perhaps just her dependence, kept her silent. Uncle Martin, ever the nervous peacemaker, coughed into his hand, a habit that seemed to intensify whenever Seraphina turned her verbal weapons on someone. Seraphina, however, was oblivious to their discomfort, or perhaps she simply didn't care. She was in her element, basking in the harsh spotlight of my supposed inadequacy. She truly believed she had cornered me, exposed my financial vulnerability to the entire family, solidifying her position as the undisputed queen of our lineage. She believed she had won. But as I met her condescending gaze, a quiet steel hardened within me, a resolve forged over years of her relentless scrutiny. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips, a secret known only to myself, a silent rebellion that no one else in the room could comprehend. Seraphina, ever observant of superficial cues, saw it, of course, but she dismissed it instantly as pathetic defiance, the last desperate gasp of a drowning woman. She truly had no idea that the modest existence she so derided, the quiet life she saw as a failure, was merely a carefully constructed facade, a temporary stage setting for a much grander revelation. She had no idea that her meticulously crafted world, built entirely on appearances, on the relentless pursuit of superficial wealth, was about to crumble, and that the architect of its demolition stood calmly before her, holding not a threadbare purse, but the very keys to an empire she could never have imagined. To truly understand the weight of that moment, the quiet power behind my seemingly meek smile, you must understand the years that led up to it. My life as Lyra, the textile artist, had always been defined by a quiet, unwavering passion and a relentless pursuit of beauty through fabric. From the moment I first felt the rough texture of raw linen or the smooth slide of silk between my fingers, I was captivated. I loved the tactile nature of my work, the way threads, individually fragile, could be woven together to create intricate patterns and rich textures, telling stories with every stitch. The satisfaction of transforming raw material into something unique, something beautiful, with my own hands, was always my greatest reward. It was a meditative process, a journey of discovery that calmed my soul and sharpened my focus. This artistic path, however, frequently clashed, head-on, with my Aunt Seraphina's rigid worldview. From a very young age, she had tirelessly championed what she considered real success, climbing corporate ladders, acquiring designer labels from the most exclusive boutiques, and accumulating properties in only the most prestigious zip codes. My art was, in her eyes, nothing more than a hobby, an indulgent pastime that yielded little in the way of financial return and even less in the way of social standing. She saw it as a quaint distraction, something that kept me from pursuing a proper life. Family gatherings, which should have been opportunities for connection, often devolved into uncomfortable inquisitions, where Seraphina would slyly inquire about my latest hobby earnings or comment, with feigned concern, on my apparent lack of desire for a proper career with a proper salary. I learned early on that her affection, if one could even call it that, was entirely conditional, entirely dependent on one's perceived net worth, on the figures in one's bank account. It was a performative act, a constant assessment of who was up and who was down in her materialistic hierarchy. My parents, bless their kind, unassuming hearts, were always incredibly supportive of my artistic endeavors. They saw the joy and dedication I poured into my work, and they nurtured it without question. Yet, even they harbored a quiet, underlying hope for my financial security beyond the fickle and often unpredictable art market. They worried, as parents do, about the uncertain future of an artist. My true solace, surprisingly and profoundly, came from my eccentric grandmother Eleanor. Eleanor was Seraphina's older sister, but they were as vastly different as two people could be. While Seraphina chased status, external validation, and the superficial trappings of wealth, Eleanor chased knowledge, embarked on quiet adventures, and found beauty in the most unexpected and often overlooked places. Eleanor was a true scholar, a quiet explorer of ideas and obscure histories, a woman with a sharp mind and an even sharper wit that she wielded sparingly, but effectively. She lived modestly, almost reclusively, in a small, cluttered house nestled among towering oak trees, a house always filled to the brim with ancient books, meticulously drawn maps of forgotten lands, and what Seraphina dismissively called junk. To Seraphina, Eleanor's life was a testament to her lack of ambition, her refusal to engage with the real world. But to me, Eleanor's house was a sanctuary, a treasure trove of wonder, and her presence was a comforting anchor in a family that often felt adrift on a sea of superficiality. I remember spending countless afternoons in her study, just listening to her talk about ancient civilizations, celestial mechanics, or the hidden symbolism in a forgotten tapestry. She taught me to look beyond the obvious, to question, to observe. When grandmother Eleanor passed away 5 years ago, her passing was met with a strange mix of genuine grief from those who loved her and thinly veiled disappointment from others, particularly Seraphina. In her will, Eleanor left me something curious, something that seemed utterly insignificant to everyone else, an old, intricately carved wooden chest, no larger than a shoebox, which had sat inconspicuously in a shadowy corner of her study for decades. Seraphina had scoffed at it during the reading of the will, her disdain barely concealed. She declared it another of Eleanor's worthless trinkets, a final piece of eccentric clutter, and openly expressed her profound disappointment that Eleanor, who supposedly had accumulated so much and lived to a ripe old age, had left so little of tangible, monetary value to the family. Just antique junk, she'd muttered, her eyes fixed greedily on the house's modest, almost paltry, appraised value, not on Eleanor's true legacy. To the rest of the family, and most certainly to Seraphina, the chest was just that, a decorative, albeit dusty and unremarkable, piece of wood. But Eleanor, in her characteristic way, had left me a cryptic, handwritten note tucked into its lid. Lyra, true wealth is often hidden in plain sight. for those with the patience and intellect to find it. This chest holds more than wood. I took the chest home, my mind buzzing with curiosity, intrigued by Eleanor's final puzzle. It felt deceptively light for its size, yet solid and expertly crafted. For weeks, I spent every spare moment studying its carvings, tracing the ancient, weathered lines with my fingertips, examining its unique craftsmanship. It wasn't simply a box, I realized. It was a miniature architectural enigma, a puzzle box designed with incredible subtlety. Using tiny, delicate tools usually reserved for the most intricate embroidery work and applying the same observational skills honed by years of meticulous textile creation, I meticulously examined every joint, every relief pattern, every almost imperceptible imperfection in the wood. I spent hours, days, feeling for a subtle catch, a slight give, anything that would reveal its secret. And then I found it, a hidden mechanism, a tiny, almost invisible spring-loaded panel disguised beneath an unassuming floral carving on the side. It was so seamlessly integrated, so cleverly hidden that only someone trained to notice the minutest details, to feel the subtle interplay of form and function, could ever have discovered it. My hands trembled slightly as I pressed the hidden button, and with a soft click, the panel slid open. Inside lay not jewels or gold, not a treasure trove of sparkling baubles, but something far more valuable, far more astonishing, a collection of aged, non-dated stock certificates, some brittle with age, others remarkably preserved. There were also bearer bonds, neatly stacked, and most astonishingly of all, a meticulously detailed logbook. This wasn't just a ledger, it was a testament to a lifetime of quiet genius. It documented investments made over nearly a century, often in obscure, nascent companies that, over the decades, had quietly grown into global powerhouses, telecommunications firms that started as small telegraph companies, energy ventures that began with rudimentary oil drills, tech giants that were mere startups in garages. It was a fortune, a truly astronomical, billion-dollar fortune, managed with a quiet genius and foresight that completely belied Eleanor's unassuming, almost reclusive, lifestyle. My grandmother had been a financial titan, a silent investor whose wealth dwarfed anything Seraphina could ever dream of, a true master of quiet accumulation. I was utterly stunned. The revelation left me breathless for days. But my first instinct wasn't to flaunt it, not to immediately rush out and buy everything I ever thought I wanted. It was, instead, a profound desire to understand it, to respect my grandmother's incredible legacy, and most importantly, to learn how to use it wisely and responsibly. I quietly engaged the best financial advisors and lawyers available, all under strict, ironclad non-disclosure agreements. We spent months, then years, meticulously auditing the assets, consolidating portfolios, and ensuring everything was properly managed. Over the next few years, I learned about complex trusts, diversified global portfolios, and the quiet, almost invisible, power of truly immense capital. I learned that real wealth wasn't about flashy displays, but about leverage, about opportunity, and about long-term vision. I chose, deliberately, to maintain my simple life. I continued my textile art, renting a modest studio apartment that served as both my sanctuary and my workshop. This was partly out of habit, for I genuinely loved my work and the creative process it afforded me. It was also partly for a more strategic reason. I wanted to observe. I wanted to continue living as Lyra, the textile artist, to see how people behaved, what they truly valued, without the distorting lens of immense wealth. I wanted to understand Seraphina's world from the outside, to truly grasp the emptiness of her relentless pursuit of superficiality, to see the desperation behind her constant need for external validation. My secret weapon wasn't just the money, it was the knowledge I had gained, the quiet power to act decisively when needed, and the profound patience to choose the perfect, most impactful moment to reveal it all. I wanted to teach, not just punish. As the years passed, Seraphina's disdain for my perceived poverty only intensified. She took my quiet demeanor and modest lifestyle as irrefutable confirmation of her own superiority, believing it to be evidence of my failure. She believed my lack of flashiness, my absence from the society pages, was a testament to my lack of success, completely unaware that it was a deliberate, strategic choice. Each family gathering became a fresh opportunity for her to subtly, or more often, not so subtly, highlight my artistic career as a financial dead end. "Are you still playing with your fabrics, Lyra?" she'd ask, her tone dripping with mock concern, a saccharine sweetness that barely masked her contempt. "Perhaps it's time to consider a more stable profession? Something with a steady income, perhaps." I would simply smile, a serene, unreadable expression on my face, offering no argument, no defense. She consistently mistook my calm for resignation, my silence for a lack of arguments, or worse, a tacit admission of my supposed failure. She saw only what she wanted to see. Meanwhile, her own life, once a dazzling and seemingly impenetrable display of affluence, began to show subtle, then increasingly obvious, cracks. Whispers started circulating within the family, carried on the winds of gossip from one bridge game to the next. There was talk of a large, ill-timed investment in a failing tech startup that had promised quick riches, but delivered only ruin. Rumors circulated about a lavish and utterly unnecessary renovation of her already enormous mansion, a desperate attempt to keep up appearances that only bled her dry. Then there was the string of luxury cars, acquired with a dizzying frequency, that depreciated faster than she could acquire them, each one a monument to her increasingly reckless spending habits. Her parties, once elegant affairs, grew more extravagant, almost desperately so, as if she were trying to prove a point to herself as much as to others, to silence the nagging doubts that surely must have plagued her. I observed silently, like a quiet shadow, drawing my own conclusions from the bits and pieces of information that floated through the family and society circles. My financial advisors, with whom I maintained a discreet but open channel of communication regarding general public financial news, occasionally pointed out Seraphina's name in the periphery of troubled ventures, or mentioned her extravagant purchases being financed through increasingly risky loans. I never sought this information out of malice, never actively tried to dig up dirt on her. Instead, I saw them as mere data points in the larger tapestry of human behavior, confirming my grandmother Eleanor's quiet wisdom about the true nature of wealth and value. Eleanor had always said, "True wealth doesn't need to shout, it simply is." Seraphina, in her desperation, was shouting louder and louder. My plan wasn't about petty revenge. It was about revealing a truth, about demonstrating the inevitable consequences of certain choices, about showing Seraphina the true, devastating cost of her superficiality and relentless judgment. I wasn't actively plotting her downfall, no, that would have been beneath me, beneath Eleanor's legacy. But I was certainly preparing for the inevitable moment when her meticulously built house of cards would collapse. I used my wealth, not to buy designer bags or flaunt my status, but to make intelligent, quiet investments that aligned with my values. I supported small, ethical businesses that prioritized craftsmanship and community, nurtured emerging artists through an anonymous fund I established in Eleanor's name, and, in a subtle yet significant move, acquired strategic properties that Seraphina herself had openly coveted and bragged about, but always at arm's length, through shell companies and discreet legal maneuvers. My lawyers were masters of anonymity. I remember one particular instance vividly, a glittering charity gala, a sea of diamonds and designer gowns. Seraphina, holding court near the champagne fountain, loudly bemoaned missing out on a prime commercial property in the city center, a property she'd been sure she would acquire. She fumed about a mysterious anonymous buyer with unlimited funds who had swooped in at the last minute and outbid her. She was livid, completely baffled by this phantom competitor. I simply stood a few feet away, sipping my champagne, a faint, knowing smile playing subtly on my lips. She never suspected for a second that the anonymous buyer, the one with the unlimited funds who had thwarted her grand plans, was the very poor niece she constantly dismissed and ridiculed. I was meticulously setting the stage for her own comeuppance, piece by quiet piece. Her arrogance, ironically, grew proportional to her escalating financial distress, making her utterly blind to the true nature of the power dynamics that were shifting silently around her. She was so focused on keeping up the facade that she missed the reality entirely. The climax arrived, as I always knew it eventually would, not with a bang, but with a frantic, desperate phone call. It was Uncle Martin, his voice strained and cracking, completely devoid of its usual nervous pleasantries. "Lyra," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "Seraphina, she's in a terrible fix. A major investment deal, the one she'd been so sure about, it just collapsed. Completely. And she's absolutely leveraged to the hilt. The banks are calling in loans, demanding immediate repayment. She's lost everything. She's called an emergency family meeting, Lyra. She's begging for help, for any help at all." My heart didn't leap with schadenfreude. There was no triumphant surge of satisfaction. Instead, a quiet, almost serene sense of inevitability settled over me. The stage was finally set. The moment I had patiently prepared for was here. The emergency family meeting was held in Seraphina's decimated mansion. Decimated not by physical damage, not by fire or flood, but by the crushing weight of her financial ruin. There was a palpable emptiness in the grand, opulent rooms, a void that even the most extravagant decor couldn't hide. The air felt heavy with failure, thick with desperation. Her usual confident, almost imperious posture was entirely gone, replaced by a defeated slump, her shoulders bowed under an invisible burden. Her face, usually meticulously made up, a work of art in itself, was pale and drawn, stripped bare of its usual artifice. She stood before us, a tragic shadow of her former self, tears streaming freely down her face, leaving streaks in the remaining makeup. I don't know what to do," she sobbed, her voice hoarse and broken, completely devoid of its usual power. "Everything is gone. The house, the investments, my reputation. I'm ruined. Utterly ruined. Please, someone, anyone, help me." She looked around desperately, her eyes lingering on the wealthier relatives, pleading with silent appeals. Then, almost as an afterthought, her gaze flickered to me, dismissing me instantly as she moved on to the next potential savior. She didn't even register me as an option. A profound, agonizing hush fell over the room. No one knew what to say. Several family members, themselves financially comfortable but unwilling to shoulder Seraphina's colossal, self-inflicted debt, shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding her desperate gaze. They murmured quiet apologies, offered empty platitudes, but no concrete offers of help. Their wealth, it seemed, had its limits. That was my cue. I rose slowly, calmly, my movements deliberate and quiet. At first, my presence went largely unnoticed, a mere ripple in the overwhelming despair. "Aunt Seraphina," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the thick, suffocating silence like a sharp blade. It wasn't loud, but it carried an unexpected authority. All heads in the room turned to me, some with surprise, others with pity, still others with a vague curiosity. Seraphina merely looked up, her eyes glazed with despair, not expecting anything of substance, certainly not from me. "You're in need of a significant sum, aren't you?" I continued, walking slowly towards the center of the room, my simple dress a stark contrast to the opulence around me. "Enough to cover a defaulted loan of, say, $50 million and perhaps another 20 for a commercial property you recently lost, and future operational costs for your primary business ventures, which are currently underwater and hemorrhaging money. Seraphina's eyes widened, a flicker of something new, not hope, but sheer bewilderment, then a terrifying dawning realization, crossing her face. Her tear-streaked eyes fixed on me, trying to reconcile the Lyra she knew with the Lyra who spoke with such informed certainty. How do you know those figures?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, laced with a fear I hadn't heard from her before. I reached into my handbag, not a designer piece, but a simple, elegant leather satchel, and pulled out a slim, state-of-the-art tablet. With a few taps, the screen glowed, and I projected a series of documents onto the large flat-screen TV on the wall. The very screen Seraphina usually used to display her meticulously curated travel photos or videos of her latest luxurious purchases. The first image was a bank statement, displaying a balance with so many zeros it stretched almost across the entire width of the screen, an incomprehensible sum. The next was a deed, showing my full legal name, Lyra Vance, as the undisputed owner of the very commercial property Seraphina had so publicly lamented losing just months ago, the one she swore an anonymous buyer had stolen from her grasp. Then came legal documents, discreetly showing that my financial entity had strategically acquired several of her collapsed debts, giving me control over her obligations, effectively turning me into her primary creditor. "You see, Aunt Seraphina," I stated, my tone even, devoid of any malice or gloating, "I haven't been playing with fabrics, as you so often put it. My grandmother, Eleanor, left me more than just an old chest. She left me an empire. An empire she built through quiet, shrewd investments, accumulated meticulously over nearly a century, hidden within what everyone, including you, dismissed as worthless trinkets." I then explained, concisely and clearly, how the worthless chest was merely a vessel, a clever hiding place, and how its contents, the ancient stock certificates and bearer bonds, had matured from modest beginnings into an astronomical fortune. An inheritance so vast it was almost unimaginable. I detailed how I had meticulously managed it, expanding it through prudent, ethical investments, and how, unlike her, I had chosen to live quietly, to observe, to learn, to truly understand the world without the distorting lens of overt wealth. The room was utterly silent. Jaws dropped. Other family members, who had always viewed me as the struggling artist, the quiet wallflower, stared in disbelief, then a profound shame spread across their faces. They had bought into Seraphina's narrative, had dismissed me alongside her. Seraphina's face went from bewilderment to a ghastly pallor, a mask of utter horror. Her eyes darted from the screen, with its damning figures, to me, then back to the enormous sums, unable to comprehend the sheer scale of her misjudgment, the profound depth of her error. The woman she had scorned, the poor niece she had relentlessly belittled, the quiet artist she had never once considered a threat, was the very person who now held the key to her salvation or her utter, inescapable ruin. The irony was a bitter, unpalatable pill for her to swallow. The revelation hit Seraphina like a physical blow. Her initial bewilderment, the blank confusion in her eyes, morphed almost instantly into utter horror, then into a desperate, pathetic plea. The mask of her former self shattered completely. "Lyra," she choked out, scrambling awkwardly to her feet, her voice cracking, utterly devoid of its usual imperiousness. You have to help me. Please. I'm your aunt. This family, we need you." "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Her usual arrogance had completely evaporated, replaced by raw, unadulterated desperation, a primal fear that was genuinely disarming in its intensity. The transformation was complete and utterly heartbreaking in its ugliness. The other family members were equally stunned, their faces a tableau of shock and belated understanding. Uncle Martin stared, open-mouthed, first at the screen, then at me, his face a complex mixture of shock, profound regret, and a dawning respect. Chloe, my cousin, who had avoided my gaze for so long, finally met my eyes, her own wide with a dawning realization of how she, too, had silently bought into her mother's narrative, how she had allowed my quietness to be interpreted as weakness. Some began to whisper, their voices filled with a new kind of respect, one tinged heavily with embarrassment and self-recrimination. There were murmurs of unbelievable, how could we have been so blind, and Lyra, you clever girl. The respect in their voices was palpable, a stark contrast to the pity or dismissal they usually afforded me. I remained calm, my gaze steady on Seraphina, allowing her desperation to wash over me without pulling me into its eddy. Aunt Seraphina, I said, my voice carrying no trace of triumph, no hint of a told you so, only a quiet, firm resolve that resonated through the silent room. For years, you belittled my choices, scorned my art, and publicly shamed me for what you perceived as my lack of wealth. You measured worth solely by bank accounts and designer labels. You called me poor, modest, wasted potential. I paused, letting my words sink in, allowing the truth of her past actions to echo in the space around us. My grandmother, Eleanor, taught me that true wealth is not measured in dollars alone, but in integrity, in quiet strength, and in the wisdom to know when to speak and when to watch. She also taught me the profound value of discretion and the power of observation, of patience and understanding. Seraphina began to whimper, a sound like a wounded animal. But Lyra, I'm family. You can't let me lose everything. You can't abandon me. She lunged forward, trying to take my hand, to physically grasp at a lifeline, but I gently, yet firmly, withdrew it, refusing to allow her desperation to manipulate me. Family, Aunt Seraphina, is also about respect, kindness, and supporting one another, regardless of their financial standing. Not about public humiliation and constant judgment, not about measuring worth by the price tag of someone's clothes or the square footage of their home, I stated, my voice softening ever so slightly, not out of pity, but out of a deep-seated understanding of the profound consequences of her own choices. You chose to live a life built entirely on appearances, on reckless spending, and on judging others solely by their material possessions. You built a house of cards on sand, and now the tide has come in. These are the consequences of your choices, Aunt Seraphina, not mine. I have managed my inheritance with the same quiet care and prudence with which my grandmother accumulated it. I learned her lessons. That is a lesson you stubbornly refused to learn, no matter how many times it was presented to you. I had no intention of letting her completely collapse, of seeing her utterly destitute. That would go against the very values Eleanor had instilled in me. But I also understood that a complete bailout without consequence would teach her absolutely nothing. It would simply enable her to repeat the same mistakes. I offered her a lifeline, yes, but it was a lifeline with clear, non-negotiable terms, not a blank check. I will ensure you have a roof over your head, and enough to live comfortably, but modestly, I said, my terms clear and unyielding. This mansion, representing everything you valued and, ironically, everything that led to your ruin, will be liquidated to cover your most pressing debts. The remaining assets will be managed by a trust one oversee. You will have no direct access to the capital, only a living allowance, enough to meet your needs without enabling your past habits. And you will work, regularly and seriously, with a qualified financial counselor to understand responsible living, to learn the foundations of true financial health. This is not a handout, Aunt. This is a chance for you to finally learn the true value of something beyond a price tag, to understand what it means to build a life on substance, not just on fleeting appearances. The terms were stark, undeniably harsh, but they were fair. It was a chance for Seraphina to truly learn humility, a profound and desperately needed lesson that she had sidestepped for a lifetime. It has been 2 years since that fateful meeting, and life has settled into a comfortable, authentic rhythm that I find deeply fulfilling. Seraphina, humbled and largely stripped of her former lavish lifestyle, now lives in a comfortable, but by no means extravagant, apartment managed by the trust one meticulously set up. She attends her financial counseling sessions regularly, and while her transformation isn't complete, old habits die hard. After all, the desperate, all-consuming need for validation through material possessions has significantly diminished. She no longer makes snide remarks about my art. In fact, I occasionally receive a small, surprisingly thoughtful gift from her, a hand-knitted scarf for winter or a carefully chosen book, a quiet sign that she is perhaps, finally, beginning to understand what truly matters beyond the superficial glitter she once chased. She's learning, slowly but surely, that there is warmth in honest connection, a peace in simplicity. As for me, I continue to pursue my textile art with the same passion, but now with a profound freedom I never imagined possible. My studio has expanded, no longer just a small rented space, and I've been able to invest in state-of-the-art equipment, explore new, experimental techniques, and even hire a few talented apprentices, sharing my knowledge and passion. The anonymous foundation I established, quietly named in my grandmother Eleanor's honor, continues its work, supporting young artists and craftspeople who struggle to find their footing, ensuring that talent and passion are nurtured, not stifled by financial constraint or the judgment of a materialistic world. I still live a comfortable, but not ostentatious, life. I travel not for show, but to learn about different textile traditions, to meet artisans, to broaden my horizons. I learn constantly, exploring new ideas, and most importantly, I create. The true luxury of my inheritance isn't merely the ability to buy anything I desire, but the profound freedom it affords me to live authentically, to pursue my passions without external pressure, and to contribute positively to the world in a meaningful, quiet way. My journey, from the struggling artist to the silent heiress, taught me a profound and invaluable lesson: that true wealth is not measured by the size of your bank account, nor by the number of designer labels in your wardrobe. It is measured, instead, by the richness of your character, the depth of your wisdom,